Bringing here practical application of the VALMIN Code by Matt Walker. He's a chartered professional geologist with 15 years of technical and operational experience across the mining life cycle, including exploration, resource development, and production geology. Matthew specializes in mineral resource estimation, technical due diligence, and geological modeling. Matthew has worked on a number of commodities spanning uranium, gold, copper, nickel, lithium, and base metals. Welcome, my friend Matthew.
Today I'm going to talk about the VALMIN Code. I don't think many of you may have heard of it, may not have heard of it, but basically what I'm trying to do today is take my very simplistic mine geology brain and condense quite a complicated subject. Just bear in mind that the AusIMM actually run a course for this that goes over 4 or 5 weeks. So what we're trying to do here is distill it down into a 25-minute presentation. But the aim of this is to cut through some of the terminology and the jargon that goes with this, and essentially you should have access to this presentation at the end of this day as well. So there's quite a few handy references present for it. So I'd just like to acknowledge Ivy, Vince, and Ian. They're always wonderful people to deal with and provide a lot of guidance. So I've had a few discussions with that. So I wanted to stress, we always ask the what and the why in Snowden. So, why is it important and why does it matter? So it comes down to the concept of managerial finance, and essentially what is the objective of the board of directors, and it's to create value for the company. And there's 2 ways they can do that, and that's through increasing the share price or maximizing the assets value. And how do we do that in resources? We drill, we try and work these assets up to get to a point where we can extract the commodity viably and economically. So a bit of an overview of what the VALMIN Code is. To give it its full name, it's the Australasian Code for Public Reporting of Technical Assessments and Mineral Assets. We're currently on the 4th iteration of the code, and I suspect there'll be an iterational update as the JORC code gets amended next year or the year after. So essentially it's prepared by the VALMIN Committee, which is a series of people that get together, much like the JORC code, and it's a partnership between the AusIMM, the ARG, and the Minerals Council of Australia. So like I said, there's been 3 previous versions of the code. We're currently on the 4th one. And why is it important? So it sits within the Corporation Act and the Australian Securities and Investment Commission regulatory guidelines. And again, the ASX, being a for-profit organisation, has listing rules that companies are obliged to report continuously to. So this is where we're talking about the continuous disclosure agreements, the quarterly reporting. So the code is, again, not like the JORC, is not mandated, but it is best practice. And it's designed to fit within that legal framework. So if you're a member of the AusIMM or the ARG, we are bound by these principles. So we follow the code where we can and with responsibility. And again, the very nature of the business we're in, there's obviously a range of valuations and opinions that are plausible. So what we're trying to distill is investor confidence. If we don't get investor confidence, we can't get the finance to build our projects. There's a few principles that overlap with the JORC code, which I'll talk to a few slides on, but essentially there's two additional values or principles that I will mention. One's being independence, the second being the reasonableness criteria. So they're slightly new, so I want to make everyone aware of those ones. And then the application. So the VALMIN Code is used in the presentation of public reports. And there's 2 very distinct avenues. It's either a technical assessment or an evaluation piece. So we call it an evaluation or evaluation. So a little bit of a background on it, and it is the world's first mineral asset valuation code, and it has its origins back with the Sydney Stock Exchange back in 1981. And they required some assistance in resource and mineral asset valuations. And essentially this came out of a few disastrous issues. I think one of them was the Poseidon Adventures. And then essentially out of that requirement, they became a series of recommendations were published in this paper here. Unfortunately, the best laid plans at this time, it had very little formalised impact until the National Companies and Securities Commission came along, which is a forerunner to the Australian Security and Investment Commission that we have today. They produced the first draft release in about 88, and then it became codified in 90. And I won't talk through those, but these are the key dates that the various iterations were produced. So 95, 98, 2005, and the current one is 15. And what typically happens is you have an event being like the MinVal conference, the outcome being the seminar book or the conference proceedings that follow. And then about 3 to 4 years after that, you get the update to the code. So these are very time-consuming processes, and hence why we're seeing probably some delays with the JORC code as we see it today. A lot of people coming together, a lot of different ideas. And its primary role is to inform investors. So again, why does it matter? I really like this image here. This is off the VALMIN website, and it shows you the battery limits of what the JORC code kind of sits in, and then what VALMIN sort of takes over with. And like I said, the JORC code is not a prescriptive system, but it allows you to develop and state mineral resources or exploration results and targets, and again through into the studies phase. Where I see the VALMIN code take over is the technical assessment of either a mineral resource or a tenure for a company, and then the next stage up would be applying an asset valuation to that, and then finally under very, very specific conditions, a securities valuation. That's where you're actually valuing the securities of a company, and they'd be underpinned by all of the precursor information. So again, it's the speculative nature of the business we're in. There's obviously going to be a range of opinions, and valuations are possible. Like I said, it's designed to fit within the framework, and there's a few jurisdictions around the world, like Hong Kong and Singapore, rely on the VALMIN code, but obviously it needs to fit within the framework of the country you're working in. So there's some hazards around that. Again, an obligation for us as registered professionals that we're going to abide by a code of principles. So I talked to the hierarchy of regulations, and right at the top is the Corporations Act. It's an incredibly dry read, but it's available. Within that, you've got the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, and essentially they're the regulators who look after the AS, or basically any private or publicly listed company in Australia has to work within that framework. And then you have the ASX and their various listing rules that companies are obliged to work with. And that's the hierarchy there on the left-hand side, and you can see the interplay. And the two specific types of public report that generally come out of the VALMIN code. So we have public reports in a valuation space, or public report in a technical space. And then what we have additionally is non-public reports. So this might be where companies are doing their own DD behind closed doors. They're assessing targets and bids. But the guidance of the code itself generally expects you to work, well, best practice would see working within the VALMIN code framework itself. So when I first looked at this, there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around, and what I've tried to do is simplify it on this screen. So right above the practitioners, we've got the commissioning entity. This will be the organization that commissions the report. So they might want to have a public listing. They've seen a company that they're interested in and would value an assessment of their mineral resources and see what the strategic options would be there. So just as by definition, essentially the Corporations Act defines a person who prepares a public report or a technical assessment and the valuation report of mineral assets or securities is essentially a specialist or a securities expert. We'll then drop down into those two categories, and a specialist would be a person whose profession, reputation, or relevant industry experience in a technical discipline, so this being a geologist, an engineer, or a metallurgist, or a geotech engineer, provides them with the authority to assess or value mineral assets. And then below that, we have the two very different avenues. We have the evaluation component and we have the valuation component. And this is where we see the independent geological reports or an independent technical assessment. Under the valuation, it'll either be at an early stage project, so we might have declared resources, we might have an ore reserve, or we might just have tenure that's got an exploration target, or it's got some intrinsic value assigned to it. The specialist then can call upon subject matter experts, and this might be on an ESG basis, on a tenure basis, or a particular metallurgical or offtake agreements. There's a whole remit, and what you find is a lot of these reports are prepared by consultancies or other businesses where it's an interdisciplinary team. So you might have 3 or 4 people working on a single report, working on their own little area. And a big thing to take away is the competent person piece. So for an evaluation, you've got to have at least 5 years experience, and then to tack on the valuation, you'd be looking at an additional 5 years relevant demonstratable experience as well. There's always the usual disclaimers of where the competent person's accepting responsibility and where they're not. And then you might have additionally representative specialists. This could be a solicitor's report that might accompany your report. Security experts, these are their own fickle beast, and essentially they're working in the sphere where they potentially have the influence will provide an opinion that might have the influence to guide investors whether they make a decision or not, and therefore they need to work with the Corporations Act, and they're going to have an Australian financial services license. So what you find is there's very few people who are interchangeable between these, and really the securities expert will rely on the specialist for technical information. The securities experts would be EY, your Canaccord, your BDOs. So I've touched on the three principles above the line, so the competency, materiality, and transparency piece. VALMIN also considers the reasonableness and independence. So I think it's important just to discuss these, and it will come into our panel discussion this afternoon. What does transparency mean? It's essentially the data and the assumptions that are in the report in such a manner that another professional would be able to reproduce or get close to reproducing that result, that assumption. So it's clear, unencumbered, and transparent. The materiality component, you can either go down an accountancy route and you put a very quantitative number on that. It might be 10% or 5%. Greater than 10% is considered material to a company. Less than 5%, let's say, it's immaterial. I think another description that is probably more aligned is if there's an omission of data, would an investor make a different decision based on that, or why has data been omissed or not omissed? The competency component is talking to this holistic view that we all have peer review and defense of our decisions, and it is a massive it is a regulatory, like a self-regulating industry, and that's very much how the regulator wanted to set it up, where you had professional bodies that were delivering this and it wasn't being mandated. And it's quite different in different jurisdictions. The independence, so it's not just being independent, it's the perception of being independent. So there can't be any perceived to be any financial benefit from the conclusions drawn in a report. They can't be seen to be leaning on one direction or another. So again, the independence, transparency components talk to each other. And then finally, the reasonableness piece is this impartiality assessment, and is it reasonable? We've got an ore reserve that demonstrates that an appropriate study has been completed, that we have confidence, give or minus some error bars, in that reserve, and the decisions that are being made off it. So on to the applications. So there's 3 distinct components, and I'll go through these in a little bit more detail and some examples. But what I've sort of highlighted at the bottom is there's some shared bullet points that you'll see comment all of these factors. So the technical assessments, so this is what I'm talking about, these independent technical assessment reports that are commonly listed within a prospectus, which will form part of an IPO, an initial public offering on the ASX. This is also extended to corporate presentations or memorandums. And then we move into the valuation space. So this might be an assessment that may inform an independent expert report. So the independent expert is taking guidance from the valuer, and it will feature in their report. There might be duty or impairment situations. There might be court-related assessments or a scheme of arrangement between two companies, or related party transactions where there's a common board of director between two different companies that hold a substantial amount of equity. And then finally, you've got the independent experts report. So this might be mitigation circumstances or expert witness reports, receivers and administrators if there needs to be a value assigned to the company on a write-down, or a material divestment or an acquisition. So what's important is that the bottom points are common to all of these scenarios, and what you'll have, and these are in the code, so they're stipulated in the code. So you're going to have an executive summary. Of importance is this concept of an effective date of the report. Often these reports are on a tight time frame to meet all of the stakeholders' requirements, so there needs to be a lot of peer review to meet a particular listing window that the company's targeting. So the data is only as accurate as the point in time that you've had that cutoff. The code does go some way to try and standardize terminology, which is excellent, and you'll see a glossary at the back end. You have the usual boilerplate statements, so who's taking responsibility for what sections in the code, or what they're signing off on, and where those battery limits are. So there'll be, the expertise component. I would be comfortable on an evaluation for a gold mine. The valuation piece, I might rely on another specialist to undertake that job. Additionally, whether there's any reliance on any other information, so particularly around solicitors' reports, we'll rely on that to do accurate due diligence on the tenure status, but also it's on the practitioner and the specialist to do their own research as well. So there's actually a fair amount of information you can pull from DMIRS. I've touched on the independence, or this concept of perceived independence. It needs to be transparently listed how the relationship between the commissioning entity and the practitioner or the company has been set out in a scope of works. Where evaluation has been conducted, the methods used, the currency and other assessments, and critically building this picture of a clear, concise report. Material project history, so has there been previous mining in the jurisdiction? Did it shut down for a certain reason? Was it gold price or something else? So a couple of examples. So this one was released by our company a few months ago. So this was Minerals 260. So the scenario here is they had a material acquisition of an asset called Bulla Bulling. It's got a declared mineral resource. So this saw a company move from a purely greenfield sort of exploration phase into an advanced development project. Therefore, the ASX said, okay, well, I think you need to have some more recompliance here under chapters 1 and 2. And basically this was to protect the shareholders, that material transaction was in the best interest of those shareholders. So they said, okay, well, we need an independent technical assessment report that's going to look at all of our mineral assets and our mineral resources and then provide a professional opinion on those. So specific to an ITAR, we're looking at the project history. So this is how we structured the report. So material information on the project history. So the investor had some context, some details on the proposed transaction details, location, setting, and the infrastructure are all really relevant information. It's not a stranded asset. It's somewhere logical. The usual disclaimers or disclosures that the commissioning entity engaged us as a professional organisation to undertake this work, and where our jurisdiction lied. It also will be a disclosure of the cost involved to demonstrate that it's a transparent commercial relationship. Whether any audits or review work was conducted on either the mineral resources or the tenure. And I think, and to really labour the point as well, so we're doing a technical review, but we're obviously offering an opinion as to the prospectivity of a region or the eventual extraction of a resource. So that opinion piece is really key. Again, it's going to be a fully referenced document. You'll often see a JORC code table 1 tucked in the background as well, and maybe significant intercepts if it's been a listing for the first time. So the valuation space, this document's a little bit old now, 2010, but still a goodie. So valuations. So the first thing I want to communicate here is this concept of technical value. So essentially, this is an assessment of the mineral asset's future net economic benefit at a given date, okay, under a certain set of conditions. So this is with the data and the assumptions of the specialist who's drawn a set of data and produced an assessment of that resource, or sorry, of the valuation. What we have then is either a market discount or a market premium that get applied to this technical value, which then leads us to what we call a fair market value. And then, there's quite a nice description of what a fair market value is, and it's the willing buyer and willing seller, and an arm's length transaction wherein each party is acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. So I interpret this as both parties are happy to make the deal. One's not under duress or not a stressed asset that a target company's coming in, and this gives you the fair value. And it's the opinion of the specialist who's going to apply that modifying factor, so that market premium or the market discount, based on their experience. And importantly, like gold's running hot at the moment, that might get a premium. Lithium, not so much, that might get a bit of a discount. But I always encourage counter-cyclical investment, so lithium's a good spot. So valuation methods are not dictated by the code. There is guidance around it. So one of the approaches you might have, it really depends on the stage gate that your project's at. If it's an exploration sort of level of study, you might conduct a market approach, and that's what you're looking at is what assets are trading for in the open market. So it's a precedent scenario. So you'll say that X deposit transacted at X amount of money and it had this resource base. If you've got a project that's like towards an advanced level of study, so we're looking at feasibility or a higher or a final investment decision, you may be able to make an income approach, and that's where we're looking at the cost modeling of said activity. Now, there's no right or wrong reason what you can choose, but it has to be commensurate with the level of study that's been conducted. And then finally, there might be a cost model, which is essentially you might use a market multiples of exploration expenditure. So understanding what the commitments are per tenure, you'll be able to value that. Additionally, there's a scientific method called the Kilburn method, and basically that is where you assess the in-ground cost, and you might add sort of multipliers based on proximity to other assets along, favorable geology, and you'd be applying a multiplier to that to get to an agreed a value. What I must stress is there has to be a low, a high, and a preferred case, and it can be made up of a few different assumptions, and it doesn't. The code doesn't specify the methodology that needs to be used. So what does an independent expert report look like? There's obviously a lot of legal stuff that goes on at the front end, but they are acting in the best interest of the shareholders. So the scenario is, would the shareholders be worse off or better off under this investment decision or because of said transaction? So there's a little bit of key information at the top there. Sorry, interesting information. The key information is you'll see that the battery limits of where these independent experts are working, they'll be relying on other people, so other specialists, to undertake the actual mineral asset valuation, and then that'll get built into their structure of the securities evaluation of that company. And this document here is linked to the previous one, and what you can glean from this, there's information on the target, the bidder, and then you get a whole remit of information on the financial position of the company, a list of the mineral assets, which has been relied upon by the previous valuer, the capital structure, and maybe some of the share price information and commodity information that goes into their assessment of the securities. And And then just to tie it all together, so in the previous example, we were valuing both exploration and an advanced project. So we used a market approach and a cost approach. So like I said, there has to be at least two methods defined, but it is at the discretion of the practitioner to define which one they want to use. So some of the error traps that we commonly see, and I've split it out into the evaluation and valuation side of things. So there has to be really clear rules of engagement between the commissioning entity and the practitioner, so that what we're looking for is a solid scope. There's no impediments why that company can't undertake or can undertake the study. The basis of the cost and some of the disclosures, if you've been previously engaged, what the nature of that relationship was. And particularly if you've provided a valuation, there'll be a feedback loop back to the commissioning entity, but you'll redact that information. That'll go back for just material assessment. So the company that's engaged you doesn't actually see that valuation. That'll just stick with the independent expert report. With everything that we try and do, there has to be a clear and concise and effective report. So this concept of data and the practitioner's opinion will be very separate. The transparency and the assumptions that have gone in to support the decision or an opinion. Any reliance on other information. The code is big on this, that the average reader should be able to follow it succinctly. And, we're not looking for loads and loads of technical jargon. We're looking for a concise report that communicates the potential in the project, or, there may not be potential in certain, but that decision is down to the practitioner making that call. And it shouldn't be swayed by the commissioning entity. When you move into the valuation side of things, the code doesn't specify the valuation method, like I said before. So being belt and braces, you want to make sure that you've documented why you've made X a reason, especially if you're applying that the market premium or a discount. Those assumptions should be reproducible by a peer or very close to being reproduced. Not one method is sufficient to define a mineral asset's value, so therefore we require a combination of methods, and that talks to the market approach, an income or a cost approach. Again, anything that's very overly optimistic or subjective needs to be tidied up. You need clarity here as to how someone's got to a decision point. Again, high uncertainty. We deal with an inexact science, and it's even more. A lot more variance comes into these things when you're trying to assess a value or provide an opinion. So there has to be that reasonable piece, and it's discouraged, just much like the JORC code. So no in situ values can be stated as well. So just to conclude, why should we be familiar with the VALMIN Code? Well, it's this concept of corporate finance, and I think it's an excellent position. As a geologist or a mining engineer, we have to be across all of these different disciplines. We have to be a generalist, but also a specialist. We work within interdisciplinary teams, so it's a fundamental understanding of all of these different components. What I've tried to do today is give you guys a bit of an awareness of this additional code, the VALMIN Code, and its interplay with the JORC code, and raise these two additional principles that are outside of the code, outside of the JORC code, the reasonableness and independence components. Some other considerations: the importance of peer review in everything we do. It's critical that you can stand and defend your own work against a peer group. We are a self-regulatory industry, so we have to be able to defend our stance on this, and we don't want to be mandated in the future. So this is all working towards best practice where we can. I must stress again that it's the minimum reporting standard, and we can always go above and beyond. The documentation and paper trail is a requirement to keep these records for 7 years. And the commissioning entity or the regulator can call upon that documentation at any one point. And also commissioning and the scope are critical. So getting that early engagement with the commissioning entity, the limits and the indemnity component is critical as well. So hopefully you guys get a copy of this presentation, because what I've done here is just tabulated. Everyone says, "Oh, go and read Reg 555 or 111." Or what is 111, right? So I've just tried to succinctly put it in here. So we see at the very top of the Corp Act, we've got the regulatory guidelines, which is basically how and when the ASIC interpret the rule and when they might enforce it. And then following on, we have the listing rules that probably many of us have dealt with before, and then some of the guidance notes that generally follow the either the JORC or the VALMIN code itself. But yeah, hopefully that was of interest, something a little bit different, as Monty Python would say. But here are the references for your work. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.